Well, you'll tell us the history of that. The wireless station that was at Fiskville is an item of Australian radio history, and we're going to hear about it tonight. So, hand over to Warren. Thank you.
What's this?
It's a microphone.
Oh,
That should be right.
thanks. I chose this photo of Fiskville, which, by the way, is from the AWA archives, because I thought it captured nicely the way in which Fiskville has disappeared into the mist of time. There's a bolt of sunlight catching it there after what I think has probably been a wet weekend, because the intermittent creek which you'll see running along there, which flowed into the dams that supplied the water for the station and for the residences, has got running water in it. But we have to go back a step.
So what year was this, Warren?
That photograph would be taken, I think, sometime during the war, between 39 and 45, which I'll explain in a minute.
Yes.
The nearest town was a little two-horse town called Balan. It got its start in life as a staging post for diggers going to Ballarat to the diggings, and Cobb and Co. Changed horses there, amongst others. It then grew into a service town, essentially, for the surrounding squattocracy. Most of the land had been taken up by people who were mainly graziers and wealthy at that, and they eventually came to control the Shire Council when the Shire was declared. The town had plenty of hostelries, of course, as you'd expect, and stables, and later it acquired a race course because there were so many horses in the area, and there was eventually a stud farm there which produced a couple of Melbourne Cup winners, including Carbine. I think that was sometime around 1890. It also had a flour mill at one stage, and because the rabbit population in the area was prolific, bearing in mind that rabbits were originally released in Australia somewhere near Geelong, which is not far to the south, there were enough pelts to make it worthwhile someone starting a hat factory. So for many years Balan had a hat factory, and they manufactured slouch hats for the troops in World War II. It didn't have any electric power until 1927, which coincidentally is when Fiskville commenced operation, and I have a sneaking suspicion that the good burghers of the Shire were embarrassed by the advent of an electrical plant just 11 miles south of the town into doing what they did, which was to buy a single-cylinder horizontal engine from Ronaldson Tippett in Ballarat and turn on the town streetlights and provide power to whichever houses were prepared to pay the price. So back to this photo. I said to Tim that I think it's a wartime photograph because on the left-hand side you see a little hut with a line of trees beside it. That, I'm told, was a hut that housed a small detachment of army reservists who were there to protect the station from goodness knows what, but they were there and duly patrolled the place and kept everybody safe. The other thing that's worth noting there is, I've pointed out the creek, haven't I, along there. And also I date it to the late 30s because you can see the ghostly outline of rhombic masts there, which supplemented the Franklin arrays. Now, I understand that the rhombic design was first launched in the early 30s, and it quickly caught on. I think the rhombic antennas had greater gain than the Franklin, and the way they operated, they didn't really need the elevation.
So how high was that mast in the foreground?
It was part of that mast is missing because it sort of didn't get included in the photograph. It's got a cross tree on the top, 250 feet high, which I think is about 76 metres.
Wow, it's a big mast.
And the rhombic masts were 90 feet high, 27.5 metres. So, in 1926, Stanley Bruce was Australia's Prime Minister, Jack Lang was the New South Wales Premier, the CSIR was founded, the forerunner of the CSIRO. South Sydney Rabbitohs were the NRL Premiers. Melbourne beat Collingwood for the VFL Premiership. Jack Brabham, Neville Wran and Joan Sutherland were born. John Logie Baird gave the first public demo of television, which surprised me when I learnt it. It's a long way before it actually became a commercial proposition. Thomas Edison declared that Americans preferred silent movies to talkies. And anyone interested in boating could still earn a decent living running ferries across the harbour because the bridge wasn't built until 3 years later. A small party of AWA technicians travelled by train from Melbourne to Balan and thence by unmade road to a remote construction site 11 miles south of Balan where they would soon be working. And that's what they travelled in. That's the AWA T-model Ford, or a replica thereof. The author of an article I read said that everything on it made a noise except the horn. So here we are, construction's commenced in the middle of nowhere on a site of 151 hectares, cut off what had formerly been a pastoral run. All the work was done by hand. Of course, there were no power tools. There was no ready mix. There weren't even any excavators. All the foundations for both the building and the masts and the anchors were dug by hand. In the I'll learn how to press the right button in a minute. That structure there is the portico for what eventually became the main entrance. And lying on the ground is the steel beam that formed one side of the travelling overhead crane in the workshop for lifting heavy machinery. And boy, was some of it heavy, as you'll see.
So they cut all the bricks in? Did they cut all the bricks in, or they weren't making bricks nearby?
They didn't make bricks nearby. I don't know where the bricks came from, but it could have been Ballarat. There was certainly no brickworks in Balan. That's what that portico looked like many years later. Mm-hmm. This was the cooling pond for the diesel engines that drove the generators. It was about 2 metres deep, 20 metres long. When I arrived at Fiskville in 1951, the pond was still there, but there were only 2 engines in the engine room, and they only operated on Thursday afternoon. And I couldn't work out why the hell they needed a cooling pond as big as that. Well, the explanation was that in 1927, of course, they had to generate their own power, and they had 3 diesel engines to do it. And given that all this was a new technology and a new venture, and nobody wanted it to fail, it was all, of course, over-engineered. Somebody told me that the electrical generation circuits were there in triplicate, just in case. You'll note the horse and cart in the background. And that's the workforce. Mostly local lads, I'm told. Of course, the engineers who installed the equipment and the technicians wouldn't have been local lads, but these were. They were labourers from surrounding farms and from the town. I think we've got a couple of foremen there, these two, because they're wearing waistcoats and jackets.
Suit, right.
And this guy over here is wearing a tie.
Yeah.
Maybe he's the AWA site rep.
Yeah, goodness.
And there it is going up. You'll notice that the outermost mast here still doesn't have its top on, but the construction of the masts and of the transmitting hall and power plant went more or less concurrently. The last thing they got to was the staff accommodation. You'll see the steel beam that was previously lying on the ground is now in place. And all these sticks, they're basically saplings. That's what the scaffolding was supported on. I suspect it was probably lashed on.
For the map of Fiskville, there is a place called Tower Road.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if it's synonymous where might have had something to do with it, or a name of a road appropriate to the system.
Might have done. That would be a CFA name. It didn't belong to the OTC era. There's one of the cross arms. There's one of the cross arms being fabricated on the ground before it was hoisted into position. And that's what it looked like when it was finished. And there, to prove my point, is the T-model Ford.
Is that one of the masts for the rhombics there, are they?
No, that's the Franklin antenna array.
More than one of them there.
There's three.
They're all similar height, are they?
Yeah, the same height.
Okay.
That's
So
perspective.
there's three in that 76 metre range.
Three. They called these, as you'll see down here if you can read that, the English masts, because that's what it was all about. It was all about establishing wireless communications with England. On the other side, out of the shot, arranged at a shallow angle of about 135 degrees, were what they called the Canadian masts, and they were aligned such that the beam could take a long circle, a great circle, or a short circle, depending on ionospheric conditions. This is inside the engine room. You can see they're still unpacking crates. Down this end there are 3 Ruston and Hornsby engines made in Lincoln in the UK and shipped out. You'll get a better shot of them in a minute.
So again, you can see the beam there. The steel beam, the steel RSJ you can see.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
There it is along there.
Mm.
It's lower.
I mean, so
There's a big I-beam in the middle.
And there's on the other side.
Yeah,
the gantry room along it.
travelling crane.
And there's the travelling crane above it. Just here.
The diesels would have been sort of very early style, 26.
Yeah, it would have been those
And they
days.
didn't really,
Be quite inefficient.
they didn't really mature until after the war.
There it is with the control panel in place along the far wall. I don't know what these machines are. Can anyone care to venture a guess?
Look like motor generator sets, don't they?
They wouldn't be rotary AC generators, was that? What frequencies were these? 125 kilohertz or something? Crazy.
Yeah, they're generating carriers.
Motor generators,
They
alternating.
could be mechanical AC generators. for the-
High
carrier.
frequency alternators.
By the time I got to Fiskville in 1951, this room was much different. The older engines had been taken out, and the station had been wired into the Victorian grid in 1940. So whatever purpose these served may well have been overtaken by the connection to the power grid.
I look at motor generators here, don't
Yeah.
These are the three-cylinder, 165 horsepower Ruston Hornsby engines from England.
And look at the size of those flywheels.
Well, they are massive. I have the figure in my head, although I haven't been able to confirm it anywhere, that they weighed 7 tonnes.
They could be.
they? Yeah, it looks like the right size.
A lot of steel then.
And my primitive understanding of these things is such that I reckon the size of the flywheels is directly proportionate to the fact that there are only 3 cylinders.
Yeah. Keeps them running.
Keep them running.
Or keep the
So
frequency constant.
on the right-hand side, is that compressed air start for them, is it? They compressed air start?
That's what I think they are, yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I saw what I believe was a later model Ruston engine, started one Thursday afternoon for a test run, and it involved cranking the flywheel with a 7-foot crowbar that fitted into notches on the other side of the flywheel, the side you can't see. And I would guess that it was to take the cylinder, the piston in cylinder 1, just past top dead centre,
Yeah,
and then they'd shoot a charge of compressed air into it.
Fire over, yeah.
Three cylinder
And do you know, were they 3 generators, 1 the principal and 2 backups, or was it 1 for each phase?
I don't know. I've been wondering that myself.
with our head circuitry in triplicate, you can understand they have 3 generators, 3 separate
Yeah.
systems.
Yeah. But those engines served, I think, from about 1927, when the station opened, until about 1940, which is a fair run.
Junkers made aircraft with 2-stroke diesels.
Who did?
Junkers made aircraft with 2-stroke diesel engines in
Did they?
the Second World War, yeah.
Yeah. That's the control panel. You'll see written above it 440, that's 440 volts DC is what they were putting through that control panel.
Mercury arc rectifiers, I suppose.
Oh, you're stealing my thunder.
Oh,
Come off it, Clifford.
Lots of DC.
There they are.
Yeah.
I made the acquaintance of one of those some years later, which I'll tell you about in a minute. Danger 10,000 volts, that's what the sign says. Maybe you'd like to tell me what these are.
Compressors?
Yeah, look like
Condensers?
The caption up the top says rectifiers and smoothing apparatus.
Condensers, they call it, didn't they?
Condensers. Filtering, DC filtering.
There's the accumulator room. Mind you, I never saw large parts of this station, even in 1951. The transmitting hall for kids was a no-go zone. I knew the workshop because my father used to go there to
foreign orders.
borrow stuff. Yeah.
I'll borrow.
But I couldn't tell you whereabouts in that building you saw that was located.
And notice the exposed battery wiring at the top there.
Hmm.
Suppose.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to put a spanner across those. Oh boy. Flash up.
And that's what it was all to support. That's the English transmitter, or as it later became known, transmitter number 1, because they ended up with more than 2.
So were these designed and built by AWA or were they imported?
To be honest, I don't know who built them, but the contract that was signed between AWA and Marconi Wireless Australia was for the design, construction and equipping of 2 stations, one at Fiskville, or Ballan as it was still being called then, and one at Rockbank, which is about 20 kilometres closer to Melbourne. So it's possible that they were built by AWA to a Marconi design, I would say.
So what sort of funnels do they use?
What sort of...
funnels, amplifiers do they use?
Ah, now, I don't know.
I mean, is it
Big glass ones.
yeah.
And you know how much power those things put out?
They were transmitting at 20 kilowatts.
Okay. Interesting how there's no attempt to make a case around them.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
It was made to be worked on, so it sort of implies perhaps a little bit unreliable.
And you didn't have to pick up any single component with a pair of tweezers.
It's notable though that 160 horsepower from those engines, each of them, adds up to a lot less than the transmit output. So they couldn't transmit 24/7. The transmit would be draining the batteries, and then the generators, alternators, were recharging them.
Right. Yep.
So not enough power production there to run the
No.
transmitter continuously.
Right.
Not even close.
But these was CW, yes?
Yeah.
So we're not talking about continuous power.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
And they weren't being used all the time either. That's the point.
Are they good for FDA? Yeah, that'd be good.
That's the other end of the England transmitter.
Valves, yeah.
You certainly wouldn't want kids running around putting their fingers in.
No.
You know?
No.
That's the big tuning coil on the left there.
It's the
Yes.
metal that is blowing. The valves,
Yeah.
10 kV on the anode.
thermionic, and a lot more heat than power.
This is the Franklin array. As I understand it, and I have to tell you, I'm not on very solid ground here. The Franklin beam aerial relied on a vertical active supported by a vertical passive which acted as a reflector. How many verticals there were, I can't tell you. They went out of fashion. They were overtaken by the rhombic design, but then later on, I understand, a curtain antenna came into fashion.
Yeah.
How it was different from what the Franklin array offered, I don't know, but I suspect that the basics were very similar. The Franklin arrays could be switched either for maximum gain to the northwest or to the southeast, depending on ionospheric conditions and the time of day.
Oh, I'm wrong about it. I flipped a digit with my calculation about powers. There's ample power in one of those to run the...
Right. Okay.
Okay.
They still being long term.
Beam.
160 horsepower, so
So now we get to the staff accommodation. You can see the transmitting hall up the road. That's about half a mile away.
So what was that? A gatehouse or something? What was that?
It's just part of the designs. It's been called Spanish mission design. I don't know.
Defense against invaders.
Art Deco.
And there's the water tanks. I think that the water for the staff accommodation was piped from the two dams that were about 3/4 of a mile away. And I think initially it was for, not only for washing but also for drinking, because as you'll see in the next couple of photographs, there were no tank waters. There were no tanks for rainwater initially. I think it was probably as a result of staff protests that they were later installed. On the left-hand side were the bachelors' quarters. There's a passageway running down the middle of that building and 3 rooms either side. And over here was a recreation hall. That's where there was a pianola donated by AWA and later on table tennis tables. And we thought it was Christmas.
So what does that say under the AWA logo? A, B?
It's the Roman numerals for 1926.
Oh, okay.
Which is only 8 years after the first direct radio contact, isn't it? Was 1919 something, wasn't it?
Yes, just after the First World War.
When Ernest Fisk made the first call.
I don't know whether he made the first call or he certainly received the first.
Equipment, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, received it.
And as I understand it, it was a long wave transmission, which the British were into and needed to be talked out of by Marconi.
Yes, I know.
1926, M,
Yeah, I thought long wave was the way to go.
B1.
It's had a grand entrance. They built something that they reckon was going to be notable and lasting.
So they are staff cottages to left and right, aren't
Those are the staff cottages. There were 4 aside. You can only see 2 aside there.
So you had to be married to get a staff cottage?
You did. You did.
So how many people would be on site, Warren?
I ultimately counted up, I didn't count the kids, but employees, 22. Not all of them on site.
All right.
So where the kids go to school?
Wait for it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is interesting.
It's not many dumps here.
Yeah.
And that's the view of the cottages from the top of the outermost Canadian mast. I included that not because it tells you anything much about the accommodation, but because it shows you the landscape.
Yeah.
Bare of houses, not too many trees. And that cottage there, that became our home in 1951. And the archway, the other side of the archway, you can just make out there. Sorry, my hand's so unsteady.
So why did they pick Balan? Was it conductive soil there?
I haven't seen that suggested. I think it might have been because it was elevated. It's on the southeastern edge of the Victorian Central Highlands. It's what made it bloody cold in winter. I don't think there was anything special about the soil.
Okay.
It doesn't look very mountainous there though, does it?
No,
It's
no.
on a plateau.
It's a plateau, yeah. And from a prominence on the other side of this gully, not a very high prominence, you'll see it later. In my day, you could stand there and look at the skyline of Melbourne, so it looks straight down to Melbourne. Yeah. I also learned recently when I was doing this research, and by the way, I should have acknowledged at the outset my thanks to John Dougal, former Managing Director and Chairman of AWA, for granting me permission to access the AWA archives, where I found all these photographs. And also to a couple of OTC veterans, Dennis Pickwell and John Simmons, who helped me with, in one case, information, in the other case, photos.
Yeah, work with John Simmons.
So those technicians, I think, went up there in 1926 to do some test transmissions, and they were a big disappointment. Results were not up to contract specifications. So the technicians got stuck into it and pulled the place apart, checked every component, made sure all the joints were shiny bright, and ran it again in March 1927. When they managed 20 hours of communication time daily, it speeds up to 350 words per minute. So it was a success. Now, from their first failure, apparently the legend was born in that particular workforce that it's important to get it right first time. What they later came to appreciate was that propagation conditions are at their worst in Australia from that location in December.
Yeah.
What were they using to get 350 words a minute?
Yeah, I think of it.
It's all mechanical stuff.
I don't know, but that's what they reported.
Yeah, it's the same as that they used on the cables, all this mechanical
If you
stuff.
can do 30 constantly, you're doing pretty damn good.
How far
Yeah.
the competition was?
Oh, 30, some people say 50, but
Okay.
it depends who's sending it. But if it's machines,
So
then
it's a
yes.
machine.
It does say up to 350.
Yeah. Very short words.
And wireless telegraph services to Britain officially opened on the 8th of April 1927. They were crystal controlled transmitters broadcasting between 12 and 20 megahertz at 20 kilowatts RF output. Within 2 months, Beam Wireless Service was carrying half the telegraphic traffic between Australia and Britain, and the cable operators suffered greatly. They came back with a vengeance, of course. That's one of the first, what did they call them? Pictograms.
Oh, okay.
One of the first pictogram received in Australia from London.
Oh, wow.
And it's a photograph of a Mr. C.J. Melrose sitting next to the aeroplane at Mildenhall Aerodrome in Suffolk, that he was about to fly to Australia as a contestant in the Centenary Air Race of 1934. There's an interesting story attached to that as far as radio is concerned too, but maybe that's a story for another time.
So you must have flown it from Australia with the Australian call sign on it.
I don't know. It's possible he did. He didn't win. And that's the first colour pictogram received in Australia via a process jointly developed by AWA and Cable and Wireless. But that came much later. That's 1947. And that's the Lang family on their arrival in Fiskville in 1951. That's my sister Margaret, my brother Ian, and that of course is me. Thank you.
How old were you there, about 8?
About 8, yep. I was in just about to go into grade 3 at Fiskville Primary School. That's what it looked like in the 50s and 60s. You can see the windbreak plantation of Pinus radiata has grown up. It actually gave it very good protection from the howling northerlies, and privet hedges along the road, a couple of palm trees. I'm amazed they survived. Here's the archway.
Substantial.
This room here was the bachelor's dining room,
333 Art Deco.
and that's the one of the. It does look like a beach, yeah. It's very dry grass. One of the hazards of that location was fire.
Grass fires?
Yeah, because they travelled very quickly. The station had a fire truck, and it seemed to me later on that the cooling pond that you saw was a very handy water resource for if the station was approached by fire. The grass was grazed by about 250 head of sheep who had been placed there by one of the graziers who leased the grazing rights from OTC. It certainly kept the grass short and probably helped protect the station. That's the gully over the road and the beginning of the low hill that gave you a view of Melbourne. And that's our cottage there. Notice how the hedges are neatly trimmed. It was all very ship-shape. And there's the water tanks that catch the rainwater. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you the interiors of the cottages, and they probably wouldn't be a great deal of interest. You can see that the cottages had open fires, and that chimney there served the kitchen. That was the lounge room. But I can show you what made those cottages run. That's an IXL stove manufactured by a foundry in Geelong. Ours, of course, didn't look like that, but that's the only picture I could find. They were the very devil to supply and use. The temperature of the ovens was next to impossible to control. It was hot as hell in summer, but it did warm the house in winter. And
Did that used to supply hot water as well?
and it had a water jacket running around the firebox, and it supplied the hot water. The technicians on the station, when we arrived there, had several of them had interest in an old mobile saw bench, and so every autumn they'd order in a truckload of what they called mill ends or scrap timber from one of the local sawmills, and saw it up. And the saw bench was powered by an old 4-cylinder Chevrolet engine and cooled by a 4-gallon drum of water, gravity feeding the engine. It was a sight to behold. My dad never bought into it, I think because he didn't fancy using it. And that is an English Ericsson wall phone, which the only way I could use was to stand on a chair. And on the other side of it, obscured, was a crank that you turn to ring a bell at the manual exchange in the transmitting control room. And that manual exchange was still there when the station closed in 1969. And the telephone number of Fiskville was Balan 61. It was, of course, a trunk call from Melbourne. Our first winter.
It's seeing it's 440 metres above sea level, so it's up, its elevation's the same as Ballarat.
Yeah,
So it's a bit cold when the wind blows.
yeah.
Yeah.
Chilly part of the world.
This is July 1951. We thought it was going to be like that every year. It was a wonderful prospect, but instead we had snow intermittently and wind chill factors of -5 or 7. most of the time in winter. The view from across the road. There's the school. The parents of the kids at the station petitioned the education department to open a school, because otherwise they had to be driven into Balan to a primary school there. And those negotiations were opened in 1930 and came to fruition in 1934 when the Department of Education gave its approval for a one-room classroom school with one teacher. OTC donated the funds to build it, and it was built by locals. You can't see from here, but it's metal clad. It's got a small entry porch where we hung our school bags, and a small storeroom, a water tank, and an outdoor dunny with 2 pans. The senior boys were paid $1 a week to empty the pans in the plantation beyond the school. And that's the entire school, grade 6 to kindergarten. Some of those kids are farm boys, the sturdy ones, for example. One of these, this lad, Peter Young, was a lifelong mate of mine because we ended up going to the same secondary school.
So how far away from that archway was the school?
About 150 yards.
Okay.
It was built on station property.
Okay.
I think they leased the land. OTC leased the land to the Education Department for $1 a year. That's the school sports program for 1951. This annual school sports was a highlight of the school life. That program, which belonged to my sister, records that I was unplaced in the 2 events I took part in. And she records that she was in 7 events. Oh well. The school was very competitive. They ended up putting us into a 2nd division because there were a number of schools, about half a dozen in fact, which were also as small as we were, and offered fairer competition. But the events were very exciting. They had things like a potato race, a sack race, a Siamese race.
Egg and spoon race?
No egg and spoon. The Queen visited Australia in 1954, another big event, social event for us. We were told that we were going into Balan and that we would line up along the railway station and have the opportunity to wave to the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh as they went past. Well, we ended up standing in the long grass and we heard the diesel electric engine approaching. It slowed down to a fast trot and proceeded through Balan. There were townsfolk on the other side on the platform. We never saw the Queen. Some kids claimed they did. I think they were making it up. But that train station became the focal point of my secondary education, which necessitated travelling to Ballarat every day. These are some of the social and sporting activities that we enjoyed. Square dancing, table tennis, My mum became a champion lawn bowler in Milan. That is after my father bought her a 1948 Ford Anglia so that she could drive herself in, because most of the wives didn't drive. You know, this is back in the days when most drivers were still giving hand signals. The car we drove up to Fiskville in was a 1936 two-door Oldsmobile saloon with the hinges on the back of the door.
Yep, suicide door.
Suicide doors, yeah.
That would have been a pretty fancy car in those days.
It might have been, yeah. It would have looked fancier if my father hadn't taken out the grill, because part of it got broken by a stone and it proved impossible to weld it. So it was toothless. Saturday night there were movies at the Mechanics Institute in Milan. The annual debutantes ball. Of course, I didn't get to go to any of those. I did. I was a member of the Scouts. Percy Day, one of the technicians at Fiskville for many years, was captain coach of the Bland Football Club, and in 1952 he won the football club's best and fairest award. Fishing and shooting, of course, the rabbits attracted the shooters. My father used to stand on a 4-gallon drum inside the hedge that bordered our house and shoot at rabbits on the other side of the road. Fishing was popular. The dams on the wireless station weren't all that successful, despite repeated efforts to stock them with redfin and rainbow trout. Every second Sunday, the Methodist Inland Mission paid us a visit and preached a fire and brimstone sermon. The Protestants went to that, and there would have been a small handful of us in the recreation hall. Sometimes my father played the piano, sometimes the daughter of the supervising technician played the piano. The annual staff Christmas party was great to start with because OTC sent a magician up from Melbourne to entertain the kids. And my mother presented books to all the school kids as a sort of reward for a year's hard work, I think. I should have mentioned a little bit more, talked a little bit more about how the school worked. The single teacher had the task of setting lessons for 6 classes. Sometimes he'd group 5 and 6, 3 and 4, etc., and that made it a little bit easier. And then, given their tasks, the kids were expected, we were expected to get on with it and complete the assignment, at the end of which he'd check our work. In grade 6, I was, and others, was given the job of teaching kids in the kindergarten how to read. So it was a cooperative effort, and it worked. It was good enough for me to win an entrance scholarship to a boys' school in Ballarat. So there were no complaints about it, but eventually they went out of fashion. I learned that when the school eventually closed, it had 2 teachers and visiting specialists for music, for physical culture, etc., etc. Other activities? Well, I'm talking here about what we got up to out of school. Both my brothers went mushrooming in spring and traded the mushrooms. Me in Ballarat, I carried them in my Gladstone bag, which was the bag that everybody used in those days.
The big old field mushrooms used to grow large as a dinner plate, some of them? No, they're just regular white mushrooms. I didn't get much for them, but otherwise I didn't get any pocket money.
Did you kill anybody with the mushroom?
No. No,
Apparently no.
I could have if we'd eaten the mushrooms in the pine plantation, but we knew better. We also scavenged the tip because everything, all household refuse and all waste from the workshops and the transmitting hall went to our tip. The tip was about 400 metres away from the manager's residence. So I guess it was a nest of rats and snakes, but they never troubled us. My youngest brother, Bruce, recovered quite a lot of copper from the tip, and both of us recovered quite a lot of lead-shielded cable, which we smelted down over a primus, poured into ingots, dug in the ground outside my father's garage, and later took to a scrap metal merchant in Ballarat. I think we got something like 10 pence a pound for it. But
What about old transmitting tubes? What were the...
well,
Again, I guess it's the question that Russell's asking. Were they the ones with beryllium oxide?
that takes us back to the rectifiers,
The mercury in the rectifier.
the mercury and the rectifiers.
Yes, yes.
I found one at the tip, and I realised what it was that was rolling around inside. So I rushed home and got a clean Vegemite jar and went back, broke it open,
Yeah.
poured the mercury in it,
Yeah.
and I was a hero for a day when I went to school in Ballarat. Everybody rolled it around in their palm. And at the end of the day, the chemistry master, once he heard about this, confiscated it. And I went back several times and never found any more. But my youngest brother did, and he's 10 years younger than me, so they were using mercury vapour rectifiers for a good long time. Nobody climbed the masts when I was there. Some kids boasted that they'd climbed to the first rest, which would have been about 25, 30 metres up, but I didn't believe them. I certainly didn't. I didn't know it then, but I do suffer from heights. They really dominated the place. You had to be in a sort of awe. They stood over you. They were looming. What I did do was nearly set fire to the windbreak plantation. I got together with a friend, another boy at the station, on a very windy winter's day, and we lit a fire inside a brazier that we'd made out of a 4-gallon drum, punching holes in the side. And it roared away. And we lit it on a bed of pine needles. And we stood for a moment wondering what the hell we were going to do. My mate tried to bring water from a nearby puddle in his inverted sou'wester, but he spilt most of it. And in any case, the top didn't have a hole in it, the top of the brazier. So we faced up to the inevitable. We kicked the bloody thing over and stamped it out, and never mentioned that episode again. My brother Ian was a little bit more adventurous. The switching between transmitter and aerials took place on a panel, two facing panels mounted on a raised gantry about 30 metres away from the station. One day when he was on his way home from primary school with some other kids, the children of the rigger who lived next door to us, he took it into his head to go and have a look at that raised platform. So he climbed up and stood on the wooden boards and accidentally bumped his head on an insulator, and the next thing he knew, sparks went everywhere. He didn't set his hair on fire, but the next day the teacher marched all the school kids up to that platform, and the rigger explained to them what it was there for and never to go there again. That's the manager's residence. My father was promoted to station manager in 1954, 3 years after we arrived there. I think that's probably the house that was built by the grazier for his own use. It was generously proportioned, as you can tell. That's the lounge room with the chimney in the front. In 1956, I stood on the roof and tried to align the Yagi antenna my father had built to receive the best television signal from Melbourne for the Olympic Games.
Tried to, so you're unsuccessful?
Oh no, we got a good signal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But it was very sensitive directionally. There's another shot of it. That's the garage, which was my workshop. And my father's. Down the side of the garage, we parked the caravan that my father had built in his backyard in Melbourne many years before, which was the means for our annual holiday by the seaside. My job every year was to get up and try and waterproof the roof by repainting it.
How long was your dad there, Warren?
He was there from 1951 until 1966, 15 years.
Did you have any amateur radio gear there?
Interesting question. My father did, but he didn't use it very much. What he developed in later years was, what he acquired and put together was a mobile radio so that he could plug into the mobile fire brigade network to monitor activity in case of fires. There was an aerial, an in-fed line attached to that house, which served my crystal set more than it served his ham gear. Just off to the left of this line of trees, there was a tennis court with a bitumen surface that had seen better days and didn't get much use. Behind the garage, there was an orchard and a chook shed. I kept chooks. At one stage, I thought I'd be a poultry farmer, but fortunately, that ambition faded. That is a Walker 153 horsepower rail motor. That's what took secondary school kids from Balan to Ballarat. And once I'd graduated from primary school, that's how I travelled.
So was it diesel electric? What was that?
No, just diesel.
Just pure diesel?
Yeah,
Okay.
rail motor. It had the engine carriage and a trailer. The girls travelled in the engine carriage, the boys travelled in the trailer, and there was no trouble.
Fraternisation.
No fraternisation, except it was a single line between Melbourne and Ballarat, and as far as I know still is. And if there was a freight train that was running late, we had to stay in a station until it went through, and whereupon we could resume our journey. The timetable said that it took 2 minutes less than 1 hour to cover 37 kilometres. So it was a very slow trip, and I left home at about 7:15 every morning and got home at 6 p.m, so it was a very long day. And after 2 or 3 years of that, my mum and dad took pity on me, and I boarded first at the school and then with families close by the school.
How did you get to Balan from Fiskville?
At first in a canvas-covered Dodge utility that had wooden trestles along both sides, and that took us into the station, picked up the orders that had been deposited with the grocers and the butchers the night before, picked up the labourers and the mechanics who lived in Balan and took them out to Fiskville. In later years, they replaced that utility with a Morris van, which in my later years, after I got my licence, my father allowed me to drive as a casual. when he was short a driver. They were very lightweight conveyances, and they bounced around a hell of a lot. They were known fondly as the Rattler. How are we going for time?
Plenty of time.
Oh, we're just an hour in.
Okay, well, we're nearly there. That is the Lloyd Triestino Line's motor vessel, the Guglielmo Marconi, commissioned by the line for the run from Genoa to Sydney, arriving in Genoa in November 1963. It's there because on board was Marconi's widow, the Marchesa Marconi. She'd come to Australia with her daughter, the Elettra, the Princess Elettra, I should say. It's interesting to me that Marconi also had a yacht, which he called the Elettra. And the Elettra yacht, I've heard of blokes naming their boat after their daughter, but never a bloke who named his daughter after his boat.
Your daughter's still alive, too, I think.
I think she is, yes, and she still is very public and vocal about her father's achievements. But in 1963 or 1964, in January to be precise, she visited Fiskville. And it was the highlight of my mother's social life at Fiskville. She got to entertain a Marchesa. I checked. A Marchesa in the English peerage is a little bit below a duchess. So there she is. That's my father on the left, and that apparently is the Consul General for Italy on the right. And you can see that the face of the transmitters had changed greatly since 1926. So by that stage, I was actually in Melbourne at university, and my ties to Fiskville had loosened a bit during the time I was a boarding school student in Ballarat, and almost completely when I went to Melbourne. So the station lingered on, I suppose, I'd have to say, because it was gradually stripped of its circuits, some of which went to Doonside, some of which were taken over by the CPAC and what was the other one? Compact and CCOM cables. And it was drawing to a close. My family left Fiskville in 1966. My father took a job in the Melbourne office until he retired a few years later. The school continued on, of course, because the station was taken over by the Country Fire Authority in 1972, and they adapted the buildings to their own use. The masts were felled, they were dropped onto piles of rubber tyres and then cut up on the ground, which seems a very undignified way for them to end their lives. We all felt, I think, kids and adults alike, that we'd experienced something that was unique. It was a very small community, but a very cohesive, and on the whole, a very harmonious community. We were never left with the feeling that we were privileged or special, because the privations of living there made it impossible to feel that way. We
Like the cattle group there.
yes, well, that was essential because there were stray sheep, or mostly sheep, but sometimes cattle, wandering around all the time. It wasn't there initially, so they obviously discovered a need to install it. It wasn't in the AWA photographs. My brothers and I felt that it was an excellent place to grow up because we learned to tolerate our own company. We learned to entertain ourselves. I became a specialist in billy carts. I tried sail karting, but I didn't understand enough about sail design. I built a square rigger, which is obviously the wrong thing to do. We went back in 93 for a school reunion. The school closed in 92, and that schoolroom you saw was taken away by the Yallock Stud, the property on the other side of the road, and is still being used, I believe, as an office. But I met up with many of my old chums and compared notes, but I haven't been back since. So that's it.
If it was operational still in 1969, what was it doing then? Sending telexes and teleprinter stuff or something like that, was it? They did introduce facsimile and telex at Fiskville, but they were also broadcasting as part of the Coastal Radio Network. Oh, okay.
The station at Cape Schanck was built in around about 1969, I believe, and so it took over the remaining functions. But I think Fiskville also had circuits to Fiji, Cocos Island, you know, minor stuff.
And those two photos that you showed us, the black and white and the first colour, were they received at Fiskville?
No, they received at Rockbank. But I put them in there.
Rockbank was a receiving station, it was the twin. Rockbank was a receiving station, Fiskville was a transmitting station. So they kept physical separation so they wouldn't interfere with each other.
I'd like to assign on that.
Yeah.
Well, where's Rockbank?
20 kilometres closer to Melbourne, west of Melbourne.
Right.
It's now almost a suburb. But Rockbank ended up being bought by a Greek Cypriot, and his extended family now occupy all the cottages.
So it appears on Google Earth that this is still there,
It is.
but obviously privatised now, is it?
Well, the Country Fire Authority
Oh, yeah.
took it over, and they developed platforms for firefighting, for putting out various types of fire.
Training centre.
A training centre.
Oh, that's the one that they're getting stressed about.
Yeah, that's the one. They,
That's it.
Of the
So,
foam
I think they've deserted it now. I don't think they've
it's
pulled
now
it out
deserted. It was. There were several cases of
because of the PFAS chemical.
yes,
Yeah.
several cases of cancer amongst station staff, and so when they tested the soil and water, they found it was heavily polluted and closed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that Plantation Road?
No, I don't think it is,
Right.
because I've looked recently at the Google Earth photograph, and there's quite a substantial pine plantation to the north,
Yeah.
and I think they named the road that ran alongside it Plantation Road.
A few funny ones, it's called Station Road,
The
Tower Road.
Tower Road.
I don't know what Tower Road is.
Must be.
There,
The CFA observation tower about.
possibly, yeah, possibly, or maybe they built a tower to dry the canvas hoses.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just a quick one, it's elevation, 400 odd metres. The position was, it's essentially, I'm just curious of the reason why it was built there, not closer to a metropolitan area, or was better for transmission there, quieter place, or is there a logic why it was put there?
There probably is, but I don't know what that logic is. The initial contract between AWA and Marconi Wireless Australia, it was the permission. They had to seek the permission of the Department of Defence to build these two transmitters. And the approval that was given by the Department of Defence included Ballarat. When it eventually was decided that it would be built at Ballan, there was apparently much rejoicing amongst the members of the Shire Council. So there might have been a bit of competitive bidding,
Okay.
but I can't see what Ballan had to offer. They
You know
didn't.
what, NIMBYs, the Ballarat people and NIMBYs don't want that in my backyard, so
Possibly.
we'll move it further down the road.
I'm sure
But it's near the railway for transport. It was near, looks like it's near a number of roads between Geelong and Ballarat and the east-west one to Ballarat. So proximity to main roads for transport, materials, etc., and a workforce, probably the workforce, Ballarat workforce to come there, etc. So there are probably a number of reasons to put it in that
Sean,
proximity. Yeah.
Sean, you're overthinking it, mate. Some guy in a suit,
I'm just curious.
some guy in a suit just said, we're not going to use that and put them out there.
Yeah.
It was that simple. You know, he didn't have a clue what they were going to even do.
I'm sure it's.
that in my backyard.
I'm sure it's in the AWA archives, but there's 275 boxes of it,
Oh, really?
and I lucked on the one that contained the photos
Where were the AWA archives?
in the Mitchell Library.
Right.
They're not housed in the city. There are some boxes in the Mitchell Library itself, but the rest are in a warehouse in Sydenham, I think.
Okay, archives.
Just another dimension to it. I put my hand up here for my Eagles or whatever. I used to be the troop commander at the Rockbank Receiving Station.
Oh, get away!
I've got lots of stories to talk to you about there, but just trying to add a bit of difference to why it may have been sited there. Rockbank and its allied defence communication transmission site at Diggers Rest was selected initially out there because A, it wasn't that far from Melbourne, but it was far enough away to be able to generate electrical or eliminate electrical noise or concerns associated with that, and also it was a railway station in terms of being able to get product out to there at Diggers Rest. My understanding was that Wallen was the preferred. Allen was the preferred site because it was more elevated and you had uninterrupted takeoff angles in every direction which way you wanted to go, and similar with Rockbank and Diggers Rest. They were on a plane where any distant mountain or if you will was not going to impact the takeoff angle that was required for the various locations.
Right.
But the Diggers Rest was first built in 1942, and it was fully equipped with AWA equipment. When I got there in the very early 1980s, they were in the process of modernising that plant there, and I'm sure that the AWA gear that was being pulled out was the stuff that was probably first, Department of Defence, the stuff that was first put in the 1940s or not replaced that shortly thereafter in that period of time. But a very similar story with large generators to keep the site operational and very similar transmission halls and things like that. Lots of stories we can share.
Diggers Rest are featured a bit in the folklore at Fiskville. I can remember my father coming home and saying, "Oh, they're having trouble at Diggers Rest. We had to send somebody over there to help them sort it out."
That's right. I mean, it was hastily built during the Second World War, and I think it was the Americans and the Air Force first that did it there. It was eventually passed across to the Australian Defence Force, and it formed part of the Defence Strategic Communications Network. So we were running trunking systems into far off places using rhombics.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Makes sense.
The station and the residences was placed on the Victorian Government's Heritage Register some years ago, but not the manager's residence for some reason. And I made an application to have the manager's residence included, but so far as I know, it never was.
Did you folk, either of you, know anything about the Catalina base at Lake Bolac, further west?
No.
That wouldn't have been interacting with your radio next. No.
Yeah, there's an airport in Fiskville, little one.
There is now.
Black
Taken,
Walnut with Felton.
the airport, the runway there can take twin-engine planes apparently. So the CFA didn't mess around.
Well, the Bacchus Marsh airports have made the gliding centre too.
Mm.
There's a method in the madness. Yeah. It's good. Excellent. Great stuff. Thanks.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Thank you.